Hello, my name is Stephen Price and welcome to the show. Today I'm in conversation with Paul Jackson, a comedy and entertainment legend. And it'll become apparent through the course of the next 20 odd minutes why that is true. Hello Paul, thank you so much for coming.
My absolute pleasure, Stephen. You're an old friend and a respected colleague. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you Paul so much. I thought we'd start today with one of the biggest shows on TV, Britain's Got Talent. It's been around for what feels like forever, but when you were a director of entertainment at ITV, you were responsible for commissioning it, and it first landed on our screens in 2007. Hard to believe. But it very nearly didn't happen at all. What's the story behind it?
It was one of those shows that almost didn't happen, and it's now probably the biggest entertainment show. Strictly, I suppose, is the biggest entertainment show, but it's up there.
Neck and neck.
It was, at the time, X Factor was going big guns, a very important part of the ITV schedule, and that was returning. And there was a feeling that if we could get one more big show like that in the early part of the year, X Factor obviously runs in the autumn, and Simon at that time had got X Factor on.
That's Simon Shapps.
Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell had got X Factor on. That was run by his company,
yes.
Psycho, as it was called. And he wanted to expand. He wanted more shows on. He was still a judge on American Idol in America, but because he didn't own that show, Simon Fuller owned that show.
Yes.
He subsequently did get X Factor onto American television, but it didn't last very long.
No.
So he wanted his own big show on American TV, and obviously it would have helped him a lot to get ITV to put that show out first, and then he could go to America and say, look what a big hit it's been.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Simon, just as he did the pilot of it, because they did an off-air pilot with Paul O'Grady, which was called O'Grady's Got Talent.
That's right, okay, yeah.
So they made a one-hour pilot, which ITV funded, and it went to the ITV Centre just at the moment that Nigel Pickard was giving way to Simon Schatz,
yes.
and Claudia Rosencrantz, the legendary,
of course,
was giving way to me. And so there was a new team in when this pilot landed on the desk. Claudia had commissioned it, it came on my desk. And it had Piers Morgan, Fern Britton in the middle judge. And Simon had, I think quite at the last minute, stood in as the third judge because nobody else, it's a pilot, people don't want to do them really.
Yeah,
and also the producers don't want to commit to the person who's doing the pilot doing the show. So it was quite... What I loved about the show when I saw it, and it was a very different show from the show that went out.
Yeah.
But what I loved about it was Piers immediately showed himself as the consummate broadcaster that he is now demonstrating every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
And he was funny, he was twinkly, and he just went for the acts in a very... he's not an entertainment guru or specialist, but he had very interesting things to say.
Yeah.
And more importantly, or as importantly, you literally could see Simon, who kind of had just agreed to step in and was there for the snooze.
Oh.
And there was a definite frisson there.
Yeah.
And I liked that very much. But I didn't particularly like the show. There were differences I won't bore you unless you want to know, but there was fundamental differences from what the show was. So we passed on it. We said, not sure, Simon, we've got a big talent show already. He then took it to America and took it to NBC in America. Idol was on Fox in America.
Yeah.
He took America's Got Talent to NBC, and it ran, as they used to do in those days with reality shows in America, contest shows, ran over the summer.
Yeah.
As a kind of tryout. The summer TV schedule is very bare in America. So they put tryout shows in there, and America's Got Talent went in there quite majorly revamped from the way it had been in the pilot.
Right.
And was a tolerable hit. It wasn't a huge hit, but it was a decent hit.
Yeah.
And so they came back to us and said, look, this is done very well in America. Are you sure you don't want it? Because we'll take it somewhere else if you don't want it. So we had a meeting with Simon, and my view was we wanted the show in this new form. The audience had become very, very important in the NBC format, and I think that's one of the reasons that the show works so well. But we wanted Simon on it.
Yeah.
He wasn't on the American show.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
As a judge. And we wanted Simon on it. We said, look, we think it'll work with you. And I said, I loved the thing with you and Piers.
Yeah.
Sparring with each other. And he said, well, I can't possibly do it. My schedule's completely full. I do American Idol in the spring. I do Your Idol in X Factor in the spring. I do X Factor in the autumn in the UK. I just haven't got the time. So we looked at his schedule, which we knew quite well because we had to know exactly where in the world he was on his private jet flying backwards and forwards. And we knew that he had this week in May off. He always, by the time he'd finished the Idol final in America and before he started auditions for X Factor in London, was this period at the end of May. And we said, well, what about if we strip the final? If we do the audition shows as the normal way, but we strip the final, we cram it into 5 or 6 days, 1 week. And the week we picked, and this is just one of those stories, the week we picked totally because of his diary was the last week in May. So that's when it got stripped. You were there at the time, Stephen.
You remember scheduling
it. You know, those strip shows, I mean, I know they're Millionaire and so on, but they're still big risks to take.
They are big risks, yes.
And by the way, when the first show went out, it got 4 million. And
well, it was against the final of Maria on BBC One. I had a nightmare because I couldn't schedule it too late, as you know, because of the children, you know, we wanted families to watch it, but I couldn't schedule it too early because it would have been obliterated.
Of course.
So I had this show with, and it was Paul Potts, I think, the guy
first winner.
Yeah, the first winner. I think he was on that show, and I had to straddle the end of Maria, and 4 or 5 million. It was
4 or 5 million.
What have I done?
And as we'll come to in a moment, the cost and so on, that was not a good result.
No.
I mean, today it would be sort of all right. Those days it was a very bad result. But of course it built over the week, and we finished with 14, 15 million on the Paul Potts winning final. But the reason that the May thing was just one of those times when the comedy gods or the entertainment gods look down on you. Of course, it turns out that probably the only half-term weekend in the entire year when all the state schools and all the private schools are on holiday is the May Bank Holiday weekend. And that's important for 2 reasons. One, it's important because it's a family show, and yet it had to play free of the soap period and so on. So it had to play 8:39, finishing coming off air at 10.
That's right, yeah.
Now, families wouldn't have watched that any other week, except even in the split half terms, it wouldn't have been as good. That was one big reason. And the second, amazingly, piece of good luck was there were a lot of children on the show. It turned out lots of acts got into the funds, and they would never have got licenses to come down to London and perform
during school time
had it not been out of school time. So that glitch with Simon's Diary was the sole reason that the show went. And I suspect, you know more than me, but I suspect it's the reason why it's always remained not only stripped, but stripped in that specific week. Because any week you can do it, in fact.
Yes, totally. That's all I know.
So we had this to and fro, and we said, I did actually say to Simon, I just can't recommend it unless you're in it. And I think years later he might have said to me, well, what do I care about your recommendation, Paul? I'll speak to Michael Grade. But he didn't. He very sweetly and cooperatively said, okay, well, let's try and make it work. We got Simon and Piers. There was a bit of shilly-shallying around. We got Amanda eventually, with all due respect to Fern, but it was decided Amanda would be the central judge. And then Antoinette were invited to host, which, of course, fantastic. I mean, in my opinion, the best, the very, very best. But not cheap.
Nope. And
it was at the time, and I would suspect it's still now the most expensive entertainment show in British television. It was at the time the most expensive show in British television. And some of the people, my bosses, and who were responsible for that outlay, got a bit worried. Because inevitably these shows grow, and so we knew what the talent costs going in, but the show got bigger and bigger, and the theatres got bigger, and the number of cameras got bigger, and it was turning into a very ambitious budget. And Simon Shapps, who was my boss at the time, the network director, had a conversation with me in the week leading up to the first recording, which I think was in Birmingham, and said, Paul, you know, is this going to work? I mean, this is going to be a very expensive. Now, you can never answer that question.
No.
And I said, look, Simon, I think it's a different thing from X Factor. I won't go into the creative details about why, but it's quite a different show from X Factor. It works in a different way. What I didn't anticipate was this wonderful Britishness about it, this kind of idiosyncratic, you know, farmers in welly boots and wheelbarrows, and I mean,
like a variety show,
like a variety
almost
burlesque
musical,
with a chainsaw between her legs. I mean, you know, just amazing things. I loved it. I loved the show. But anyway, he phoned Simon Cowell. He said to him, "I'm going to have to speak to Simon about this." And Simon, from both ends, I've heard the conversation from both parties. Simon was very, very good. Simon said to him, look, Simon, I understand exactly the pressures that are on you. Simon Cowell said, I understand exactly the pressure you're under. I get it. I'm a businessman. I understand what you're talking about. Let me promise you this. I will know in my bones if this show, I've been doing this stuff long enough now, I will know in my bones if we've got a shot with this show or if we haven't by the morning of the first recording.
Wow.
I will phone you. It was the Monday. This was Thursday or Friday this was happening.
Yeah.
I was at Amsterdam Airport coming back from a recce I'd done.
Uh-huh.
And Simon said, I will phone you. I promise you, Simon, I will phone you Monday lunchtime. And if I'm worried, if I've got a cold draft on my back, I can feel the wind whistling around the stage, I will call you and tell you. You won't save any money between now and Monday by calling it off. We might as well go and do I think it was the Birmingham auditions.
Yeah.
And true to his word, he called earlier than lunchtime on one day and said, forget about it, relax, we have a major hit. I went up there a few days later and I would have given Simon the same answer. You knew in the audience, and then not many weeks after that, we were in Cardiff and I was lucky enough to be there, and onto the stage walked Paul Potts, a beaten up, slightly unprepossessing look, ill-fitting suit, crooked teeth. Onto the stage he walked and said, I want to be an opera singer.
Yeah.
And the atmosphere in the auditorium, and I was in Cardiff, if you're going to sing opera, it's a good place to do it.
Yeah, you're going to have to do it well.
But you're going to have to do it well. They love a good voice in Cardiff.
They do.
But the atmosphere was...
Yeah,
and
really?
Piers' look, which is on the show if you want to look at it on camera, and Simon's look. I mean, those guys... That panel, I think that panel of three was the best judging panel I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
They both just gave the audience the clue, really. And then they say, right, well, off you go. And if you listen to the show, I love this. I think it's 4 or 5 seconds of silence, which you never, ever have on a television show. No. And certainly isn't natural. That was created in the edit. I mean, there's no way a theatre that big
could be that
quiet.
Yeah.
They say, off you go, and they look at Paul, and he gives the thumbs up. They see the button on the thing, and it's inside. It's 4 or 5 seconds of silence. Of course, what happens? Everybody at home...
leans forward. What could this be? It'll be terrible.
And out comes Vincero. And literally, and again, in they go. Amanda bursts into tears. The two boys go. The crowd goes and he ends on the standing ovation.
Yeah.
And I knew then, I'd taken Simon's word for it before that, but you think then, well, this is life-changing. This is, that guy walked on,
genuinely,
a mobile phone salesman, and he walked off pretty close to a millionaire, and he was eventually a millionaire, quite quickly a millionaire, Royal Variety Performance, world tours, best-selling records.
Yeah.
And, the kind of participating in that kind of life change, people knock these shows and it's very easy to knock them. They're fairy tales. That is the...
Yeah.
I hate to say it's the Frog and the Princess,
Yeah.
Amanda blessed him and he walked off a prince.
Well, I remember, because I do remember you gave me an advance copy. It wasn't much time. I think it was already in the listing magazines by the time I got to see it.
Well, they weren't ready until a few days before.
Precisely. So, and I remember you showing it to you kindly gave me a DVD and I put it in and I watched it. You hadn't told me, and I watched it. And I was, on a basic, Tuesday in the office where it's all very sort of, soulless, and I watched this thing, and it was extraordinary. The hairs on the back of your neck went up. And I knew then, even from a sort of a strategic point of view, I thought, this is really rather good, and that was when I had that scheduling dilemma, which made me feel sad. But then, as I was not surprised with the growth in that first week.
Well, of course, once you were past the Saturday, you could then run it at 8:30 or 8 off the back of Corrie, whatever you did.
Yeah, that's right.
And know that, and you just saw it grow, and it went from 4 million to 14, 15 million.
That's
I think
right.
The final, wasn't it, over 15 million?
Over 15 million. It was one of the biggest shows in ages.
And I think I remember the broadcast, top 20, top 30 coming out, and it was literally 8 shows out of the top 10,
that's
wasn't
right.
it?
From a sort of nerve-wracking sort of moment to, hey, let's have more.
How can we have? How many can we have?
Fantastic.
And of course, Piers eventually left, and there was a bit of mucking about. Simon didn't do a couple of seasons, and now we've got Simon back with Williams playing exactly the same role as Piers used to play, although in a much camper, more obviously comic way. But what a perfect judge. It's a very British show at a time continuing now when we need a bit of Britishness.
Yeah, I think so. It's a search for identity, and it certainly gives
I think, look, whichever way this whole thing goes, we're going to need to be pretty clear about who we are.
Yeah, that would be nice. And sort of in a cunning segue, Britain's Got Talent is one of a host of big Saturday night entertainment shows. Well, not just Saturday night, but big entertainment shows. Strictly Come Dancing, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which actually is a stripped event over 2 or 3 weeks. But they're big expensive entertainment shows. And they're operating in an era where all the talk, the TV revolution in streaming, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, etc. And, increasingly iPlayer, ITV Hub, Sky Now, where the emphasis is on drama and features, either movies or documentaries, but not these sort of live or as live entertainment shows.
TV goes in cycles, and at the beginning of this century, Strictly, Dancing on Ice, X Factor, Got Talent. I mean, I'm a Celebrity, as you rightly say. The entertainment shows were the daddy, and they spread across the world. They made fortunes for a lot of people, and they entertained vast numbers of people across the world. And one of the things that was so important about them to a scheduler, and again, Stephen, I'm teaching my grandmother here, one of the things that schedulers loved about them was that they were kind of like sporting events. They were live, so nobody could know what was going to happen, as in a sporting event. And you kind of had to watch them then. I mean, you could come home after a night out in the pub on a Saturday night and watch it straight away. But if you let it get to Sunday morning, you knew the result. People were already talking, not in those days tweeting, but they were talking and phoning each other. You were out of the conversation. How does streamed viewing work? How does secondary viewing on the iPlayer devices work? By binge viewing, by non-scheduled viewing. You watch when you want to watch. I was going to say it's a bit of luck that dramas come through just at the time that the entertainment was filmed. But the trouble with the dramas is they're not dominated by the broadcasters. They're dominated by Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and so on. So, as you say, it's been predicted many times, Stephen. And look, we'll always have television. And if you're Ford Motors and you're bringing out a new model, the quickest way to tell the world is to put it on a broadcast TV show.
And talking of revolutions, it would be remiss of me not to mention you were the producer and director of The Young Ones. And I just wanted to put it into context before I ask the question. But in the same week as The Young Ones launched, the 3 other sitcoms on television that week were Terry and June, Heidi High and Sorry, which was the Ronnie Corbett thing, all of which were sort of season 2 or 3. And the question begs is, how on earth did The Young Ones sneak through?
Well, there's a very, very specific answer because you put the context, but you missed the one vital point in the context.
Of course.
And the vital point is the Friday that Young Ones went out, I think it was a Friday, Channel 4 had launched the Saturday before, 7 days before.
Of course.
And on the first night of Channel 4, heavily promoted, there was a little half-hour show called Five Go Mad in Dorset.
I remember it.
Made by a group called The Comic Strip, which were mainly the people from The Young Ones plus Peter Richardson. And there were reasons why that had happened. We haven't got time probably to go into them now, but there was a connection, let me tell you. And what had happened was we'd made the pilot of The Young Ones. It had been stuck in a back vault, never to be seen again, until Jeremy Isaacs got up in the early part of that year and announced some of his early commissions, among which was this group of comedians who were already quite buzzworthy. There was a lot of talk about them in the press, and there was no social media then, but people knew who they were, certainly in London. And he said, we've got them all, and they're going to do this series of films. We've got one to start with, Five Go Mad in Dorset. And I literally got the phone call from my bosses, I mean, good guys who I liked very much and supported me in the making of it, but who had said, Paul, we've got bigger failures than this in the vaults, don't beat yourself up. Can you make 5 more by the autumn?
So in direct response?
It was literally a direct response to that announcement. Can you get the cast together to make 5 more? Then we'll have a series of 6. And what happened was Five Go Mad went out, but that was all there was at that time. And then we got our 6 away, and then obviously Comic Strip became a staple at Channel 4, and we did a second season of Young Ones.
And did you feel part of I mean, 1982, just punk was sort of still sort of in the air. There was a sense of change. There was a youthful movement. Coming through in entertainment or in TV in general. Did you feel, you must have felt part of something so exciting and
Well, I did. I mean, I was in a funny position because I was directing the 2 Ronnies at the time, so I was very much part of that. I know I'd only just finished directing Jane Game and Blankety Blank and things. But I tell you, the first time I ever went to see them, Stephen, it exactly speaks to what you're talking about. They appeared in a strip club called the Nell Gwyn, or above a strip club called the Nell Gwyn, which is in a little street, I think it's called Meard Street, just off Wardour Street. So you walk up Wardour Street and you turn left and you go up in this rickety lift and there's the Comedy Store, which is where they all started. About 20 yards further on the right-hand side, you go down another little mews, and that's where the Marquee used to be. And 10 years, 12 years before that, I'd walked up those streets, turned into the Marquee and watched The Who and Georgie Fame and Manfred Mann. And I remember the first night, and I knew then at 16, my God, this is going to explode. You don't understand what's going on. I remember going home back home to my dad, who was a TV producer, saying to him, this is going to blow the world apart, and he's 16, what's he like? And I remember thinking, this comedy is never going to be global like music is, or very rarely. But I remember thinking these guys have got the same self-confidence, have got the same bubble whereby they're all talking the same language. They are not going to be easily understood or appreciated by anybody over their own age group. I was about 10 years older than all of them. And I remember going back to Robin Nash and saying, who was my boss then, head of variety at the BBC, saying, Robin, this is like the Mersey beat boom in the early 60s. This is the same thing 20 years later. We've got to get it on. So I absolutely felt the excitement of it. And it was just a fantastic time. And, we went on to do Filthy Rich and Happy Families, and maybe most importantly, Saturday Live.
Yes.
And they were Saturday Live and the other ones, they were wonderful. We did Red Dwarf and we did Three of a Kind. I mean, there was a whole, they weren't alternative, but they were young comedians writing in a slightly different way. So although I'm a big fan of that traditional comedy and I'd grown up with it, and, Fawlty Towers, is a very traditional comedy. By the way, The Young Ones is a very traditional comedy.
Well, yeah.
People, think it's this groundbreaking thing. It's not at all. If you look, it's a nuclear family, mum, dad, and two rebellious kids. It's a very standard, but it takes the mickey out of the whole premise and procedure of sitcom.
That's what and also the sort of the feel of it, the look, the language,
the language.
Vivian headbutting literally everything.
Yes, it was very violent. Cartoon violence, we always had to explain.
Yeah.
He chops his finger off, it's there the next shot. So it was very Tom and Jerry violence. It's not as naughty language-wise or sexy-wise as is always implied. In the whole 12 shows, we cut one tiny scene after the show was made and edited, and it was Rick running upstairs to his bedroom to get something, and we cut ahead of him into his bedroom, and his two teddy bears are on the bed, and the joke is that he's even got teddy bears on his bed, but they're this on the bed, the two teddies, and they hear him coming and they jump off, and we were asked to take that scene out. Can you believe it now? But we were, and it's a 10-second shot, and we took it out. That's the only cut we made in. So, the BBC was a very supportive place to work in those days.
Yeah, and it's spoken so fondly of today, and my stepson, when he was 13, discovered The Young Ones, and wow, look at this. It's like, we've been there, man. Been there. But talking in more general terms about sitcoms, you're steeped in them. And I just sort of thought I'd take a quick glance through the schedules at the moment, looking for sitcoms, and there are more, but the ones that caught my eye were Derry Girls on Channel 4, Hold the Sunset on BBC One, The Long Run, which is coming up on Sky One, Will and Grace, a rebooted American sitcom, and ITV, which doesn't have a great track record in recent times of sitcoms, had one with Jack Dee in it called Bad Move. Last autumn. They are just 5 off the top of my head. It feels to me, the sitcom is much talked about, much discussed. People get very passionate about them. It's extremely subjective sort of notion of what is a good sitcom and what isn't. But just from that list, that seems like a good range, almost as good as a range as in 1982.
Steve,
is it in rude health, sitcom?
The death of sitcom, which, by the way, is one of the very, very few, if not the only, unique format that television has created around the world. You can only do sitcom on television. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because of I'd bore you with why that's the case, but it is the case. And I can't think of anything else that you can say that about.
No.
It works on radio as well, actually, serial radio comedy. Yeah. But the sitcom, people have predicted its death since 1950. It's not dying at the moment. In fact, we are extraordinarily rich at the moment. You mentioned ITV. They've got Plebs on, which couldn't be more different from Bad Moves. We've got Mrs. Brown, one of the most successful shows in British television at the moment. Very traditional sitcom. You had Miranda a couple of years ago, very traditional sitcom. I just went to the studio the other day because I haven't seen Ben for a long time. I went to see a recording of Upstart Crow, the 3rd season. Yeah. I think he's created another massive hit. Ben's an underrated guy. Richard Curtis said to me a long time ago, you know how hard it is, Paul, to make one successful sitcom.
Yeah.
He was talking about Amanda Iannucci. He said 2's hard. 3, he said, Amanda's had 4. Well, Ben's had 4, at least 4.
Yeah.
He is a very, very talented writer. He's also a lovely guy. And I think with Upstart Crow in this 3rd series, I think he's writing pure gold.
Yeah.
It's funny. David Mitchell's giving a great performance. You've got Mum. You've got, as you say, John Cleese back on television.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no shortage of good comedies. And you've got the BBC Three stuff, some of the new shows on BBC Three.
Very much so.
They're not so much to my taste, but, you know, they're very successful. People Just Do Nothing, I do actually like. It's a lovely show. Well, I mean, from People Just Do Nothing to Plebs, to Hold Back the Sun, to Mum, to Mrs. Brown.
Yeah.
What? And comedy's
What
dead?
else do we want? Yeah.
Well, how much do you want?
Yeah. And is it because I remember seeing the first Blackadder, the Blackadder. I remember all this so clearly because it was like, oh, this is for me as well. And it wasn't great. And then Ben Elton, I think, came along pretty much and sort of rescued it. And it became fantastic. And there was that real feeling of it belonged to me. And I wonder if there is something about a sitcom which people feel they need to own.
Comedy performs a really important function within social mixes and social stratas. It deflates authority, it expels aggression. It's very difficult to be afraid of somebody or cross with somebody when you're laughing at them.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very bonding thing. We're 30 times more likely to laugh in company than we are watching the same joke on our own, so somebody's proved somewhere. So it's a cathartic thing. It's a very basic form of communication. You just think about it. You don't use your soft palate or your lips or your tongue at all. You just expel air.
Yeah.
It's not controlled from the same part of the brain as language is controlled. It's a very basic form of communication. It is, along with crying, the only known expression which is universal across every discovered human group so far. They're the only two things
laughing and crying.
Everybody recognises. It exists in the primates.
Yeah.
The best way to get primates to laugh is to tickle them, but it exists as a recognisable response. So it's very, very hardwired into us. Look, just yesterday, Ken Dodd died. Look at the response to the death of Ken Dodd.
Yeah.
Ronnie Corbett, not so long ago. Tommy Cooper, a long time ago. Emma Chambers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, lovely, lovely, but not the biggest, most famous actress in the world. But look at the response when she passes. Because people love people who can make them laugh. You think of your best friend, or you think of somebody you've lost over your life. Think back to the memories that you hold of them.
Yeah.
How often are they memories where you've laughed together?
Usually funny, yeah.
Laughter's an incredibly powerful bonding mechanism in society, and you do own it.
Yeah.
Jack Dee once said to me, "You never laugh like you laugh in school."
Yeah,
and it's true. You know,
true.
your mates if you still are friendly with your schoolmates, I bet you remember the rugby tour that you went on, or it has a cement that glues people together. What I'm desperately concerned in this current atmosphere is that we don't lose it, that we don't start legislating it out of existence. You know, there's a lot of voices at the moment telling us what we should and shouldn't laugh at and what we can and can't laugh at. And I understand, obviously, I don't remotely support hate speech or aggressive bullying or any of those things. But throughout the ages, we've used comedy as a way to deflate or puncture people who are trying to bully us, trying to be aggressive, trying to empower. Look at, the great dictator. You don't need to go further than Chaplin.
No.
And, don't throw that away because you'll find it hard to get it back.
Yeah. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to come to today. And thank you so much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.